third type of simple diffusion is osmosis. Osmosis refers to the diffusion of water. Water moves through the plasma membrane from an area of high concentration to an area of low concentration. In a solution, there are solutes and solvents. In the human body, the most common solutes are sodium, potassium, and calcium. In our body, the solvent is water. It is important to understand that when a concentration gradient for solute exists, so does a concentration gradient for water. This means that if there is a solution with low solutes, by default, the solution has high water. Likewise, if there is a solution with high solutes, it will have low water. There are three important characteristics associated with osmosis. First, it only refers to the movement of water across the membrane. The membrane must be permeable to water. Water is going to flow across the membrane toward the solution with higher solutes. If there was a funnel in water, and at the base of the funnel was a selectively permeable membrane, and inside our funnel was a solution of 25% molasses, molasses is like corn syrup or pancake syrup. That means this solution has 75% water. The funnel is put into a beaker or dish of 100% water. The membrane is permeable to water, but not molasses. As a result of osmosis, water will move from an area of high concentration toward an area of low concentration. In this case, there is more water outside of the funnel than inside, so the water will move in. As water moves into the funnel across the permeable membrane, it raises the volume of the molasses solution inside, and that moves up the tube. The level of molasses will rise because the water diffuses across the membrane and increases the volume of molasses. Osmolarity refers to the total solute concentration in an aqueous solution. Cells respond differently to different solutions. Tonicity describes how a solution affects a cell. Red blood cells are good models to show how cells respond to different solutions. A hypertonic solution is one that has more solutes and less water compared to the inside of the cell. If a red blood cell is placed into a hypertonic solution, it will shrink as water moves out of the cell down its concentration gradient. This is called crenation. A hypotonic solution is one that has less solutes and more water compared to the inside of the cell. If a red blood cell is placed into a hypotonic solution, it will swell as water moves into the cell from an area of high concentration to low concentration. If enough water moves into the cell, it will burst. This is called hemolysis. Finally, an isotonic solution is one that has the same number of solutes outside the cell that is inside the cell. If the solutes are equal, that means the water must be equal as well. In an isotonic solution, water will move in and out of the cell at the same rate. Notice that when a red blood cell is placed in an isotonic solution, the red blood cell has a normal shape, which means it can function normally. The next type of transport is filtration. Filtration is the movement of solutes and solvent from an area of high pressure to low pressure. The force inside the body that drives filtration is called hydrostatic pressure and is created as blood moves against capillaries. Hydrostatic pressure is the force of blood against capillaries, and this pressure moves fluids and molecules out of the blood and into the tissues. The kidneys produce urine by filtering wastes and water from the blood. This will be covered in more detail in A&P2. Carrier-mediated transport involves the movement of ions or molecules carried across a membrane by binding to an integral membrane protein. There are two types of carrier-mediated transport. The first type is facilitated diffusion. Facilitated diffusion is a passive process, meaning it does not require energy. Solutes are moving down a concentration gradient from an area of high concentration to an area of low concentration. There are three important characteristics associated with this mechanism of transport. The first is specificity, meaning a transporter will only transport one type of solute. Secondly, there are saturation limits, meaning the transporter can only transport so many solutes at a time. Lastly, facilitated diffusion can be regulated, like enzyme regulation discussed in the last chapter. In the example of facilitated diffusion in this figure, the solutes will bind to the integral membrane protein serving as the transporter. When the solute binds, the transport protein will change shape and the solute will be transported across the membrane. Active transport is not dependent on a concentration gradient. Active transport requires energy from ATP. In active transport, solutes are moving against their concentration gradient. This means they are moving from an area of low concentration to high concentration. Active transport will create a concentration gradient rather than eliminate one as the other transport mechanisms will. An excellent example of active transport is the sodium-potassium exchange pump. As mentioned previously, sodium and potassium ions are principal ions in the body. Outside the cell, there's a very high concentration of sodium ions and a low concentration of potassium ions. Inside the cell, there is a low concentration of sodium ions, but a high concentration of potassium ions. The maintenance of this gradient is key for many different cellular functions. So to keep the gradient, the cell uses a sodium-potassium exchange pump. This exchange pump works by pumping 3 sodium ions out of the cell and 2 potassium ions into the cell. This pump moves these ions against their concentration gradients. During active transport, the cell consumes ATP every time it pumps 3 sodium ions out of the cell and 2 potassium ions into the cell. The sodium-potassium exchange pump is so important for cellular function that the cell uses up to 40% of its energy to run this pump.